Okay, so welcome everyone. Good morning. It's good to have you all here with us today. And we're going to have this beautiful lecture from our brother and friend Tiago about death. And today we're going to start a little bit different because usually we do reading and then we have our initial prayer and then the lecture. Today I'm going to do the initial prayer and then I'm going to do the reading. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the reading that I was asked to do today has everything to do with the lecture. And in fact, Tiago, probably towards the end of his lecture, is going to actually explain a little bit about this message that's going to be read now. And it's a message from the book Cartas e Crônicas from Humberto de Campos. Okay, but let's first do our initial prayer. So let us all now here, with an open hearts and our open minds, thank God for the opportunity of being here today, once more together, to learn a little bit more from those precious lessons that will be brought to us today. So be it. Tiago, sir, what's the name of the message?
Training for Death.
So it's called Training for Death. Worried about survival beyond the grave, you ask amazed how the training for death should be carried out to avoid surprises after death. The question is curious and really gives food for thought. Believe, however, that for now it is not very easy to technically prepare a companion for the ineffable pilgrimage. Tourists come from Asia or Europe efficiently, enabling future travelers, since they do not lack the necessary terms for proper analogy. But we, the discarnate individuals, bump on almost insurmountable obstacles. Strictly speaking, religion should guide the achievements of the spirit, as well as science directs all issues pertinent to material life. However, religion remains somewhat attached to the superficiality of a priesthood with touching the deep recess of the soul. It is important to consider that your query was directed to me, a poor journalist without merits to address such an inquiry, instead of being directed to the great theologians of the earth who are totally domiciled in spirituality. Though I have been here for almost 20 years, I still feel in a way like an indigenous person suddenly brought from the jungle to some of our universities with the obligation to suddenly join the highest studies and the most complicated subjects. For this reason, I can only count on my own point of view with the deficiencies of a primitive individual who was caught near the core of civilization. Preliminarily, I admit that I should refer to our old bad habits. Their crystallization is here a tyrannizing plague. Start the renewal of your habits at each meal. Gradually decrease the lust of eat the flesh of animals. The cemetery is the belly in a torment in the great transition. Pork loin or veal fillet, seasoned with salt and pepper, do not place us far from our ancestors, the cannibal primitive ones. Widely ingested drinks are another dangerous obsession. I have seen many souls of apparently exquisite background willing to trade heaven itself by the aristocratic whiskey or our Brazilian cachaça. As much as possible, avoid the abuse of tobacco. The condition of discarnate nicotine lovers is pitiful. Do not give into the temptation of narcotics. No matter how distressing crisis seems to be while in the body, stay strong when facing the blows of struggles. Victims of cocaine, morphine, or barbiturates linger a long time in the dark cell of thirsty and inertia. What about sex? Carefully preserve your emotional balance. We here have many good people carrying living hell labeled love. If you have some money or hold any earthly possession, do not postpone donations if you are really inclined to do them. Great individuals whom we admire in the world for their skill and power with which they materialize important business, here appear in many instances near us like desperate children, for they do not get to manage their checkbooks any longer. Within your family, be careful regarding your living will. Fatal diseases may assault anyone, and if your paperwork is not in order, you will suffer much humiliation in the courts and notaries. Above all, do not cling too much to your blood ties. Love your wife, love your children, and love your relatives in moderation, certain that one day you will be part, and thus they will almost always act contrary to your will, although they may respect your memory. Do not forget that in the present state of terrestrial education, if someone loved ones register your extraterrestrial presence after the funeral, certainly they will demand that you descend to hell, since they are afraid of your inopportune return. If you already have the treasure of a religious faith, live accordingly to the precepts you embrace. What a terrible moral responsibility it is to know the path without balancing oneself within it. Do the most good you can without worrying about pleasing everyone. Convince yourself that if you do not feel sympathy for certain individuals, there are people who hardly tolerate you. Therefore, keep your noble smile in all circumstances. Work always. Work incessantly. Service is the best solvent for our grievances. Help yourself through the loyal fulfillment of your duties. In regard to everything else, do not give up or inquire too much, because sooner or later, death will offer you its business card, exposing you to everything that I cannot tell you now. Tiago, all yours.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you, Teresa. You saved me a lot of work for after, first of all. And starting with this message, I believe it is very important because talking about death, first of all, for many of us, brings a lot of weight. So then we can just take that weight away for a minute. Talking about death means talking about someone that died, talking about loss, talking about something that we don't have anymore, someone that we don't have anymore. It's talking about fear. It's talking about fear of the unknown. But Spiritism, first of all, among so many gifts that it gives to us, one of the most important is showing us what death really is. We carry for centuries, and that's very important talking about death, we do carry for centuries, for many different existences, prejudice, taboos, feelings related with this topic. Our lives as incarnate spirits, as human beings, are all bound by cycles. Everything has a beginning, a development, and everything has an end. This is true. But there is more. And the Spiritism helps us to understand that this step beyond, this step ahead, we will unveil what many of us don't have the idea or don't remember of what happens after death. So let's start. Oops, I need to turn this on first. And this message has a very important meaning because it also brings the idea and the perspective of death to a very intimate place. Here we're not talking about any death, but we can look to ourselves and place that moment or that event, which is actually common to everyone, and make it be part of our lives. And then if we are able to slowly integrate that event in our lives will make more sense. So let's try to, during this few moments that we have together, trying to incorporate some different ideas about death that will help us to treat it with more naturality and to understand much more about ourselves through understanding better about death. So, I don't know if some of you know, but here is the grave where the body of Allan Kardec was buried, there in Paris. And there is an inscription here. It is in French, but here is the translation. To be born, to die, to be reborn yet again, and to always progress, that is the natural law. And beautifully, in his own grave, and we are talking about death, we somehow summarize. That phrase is from the book, What is Spiritism? It's a very small book that Allan Kardec wrote. And summarizes, in fact, the place that death has in our process of spiritual evolution. Not more, nor less, but as important as to be born, as important as to progress. Actually, it is a condition for progress. It is that we must die. And it is something natural. And we will see how he explains that together with the spirits that gave us so much information about that, coming from the dead in order to give us so many information. And why should we know? Why is that important? And that is interesting because also for me, who said the most important phrase about the truth was Jesus himself. And the importance of knowing about us and knowing about our death, because it will make us free. And again, a little more free from those prejudices, from those fears, from that difficulty and that struggle that we may find when we talk about death and when we face death, our own or anyone else's. So let's start trying to understand when we talk about death. We're talking about probably our own. We are talking about death as we learn in Spiritism that we are immortal spirits, right? So why death? And why Spiritism will talk about that? They would just say, no, it doesn't exist. You don't need to talk about it. Death is, non-existent. No, but we need to understand, first of all, what are we? The Spiritism will tell us that, first of all, we are spirits. We are that flame, that sparkle, that principle that emanates from the will and love of God. And then He creates us. In order for us to relate with the world and with other spirits, we need an intermediary, a body. And that body in the spiritual world, we know today, with information from the spirits, that is called perispirit. And then we have, when we come to incarnate, we dress ourselves with a material body. So we are comprised of those three elements. And that is very important to understand that, first of all, because death will make us understand why this triple aspect of our existence is so important. In the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec will ask, first of all, what is the Spirit then? It is the intelligent principle of the universe. Okay. Doesn't convince me yet. It's a very interesting answer. Somehow very vague. But fact, we are all intelligent beings. Okay. And then he keeps questioning. How may we define then spirit? I think he was not convinced either. It was too vague. Well, we can say that the spirits are intelligent beings of creation. God creates incessantly. And when he creates that intelligent principle, they will be then what we call the spirit. And they populate the universe beyond the material world. Oh, so there is something that is not material. There is something that or comes before the material or survives the material life. So then we can start scratching our heads and saying that is a little more than what we see here today. First of all, this is a very philosophical question. We're talking a little bit about the emotional aspect of death. Here is a very intellectual part of understanding what we are in order to understand death. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the moral aspect. And then Allan Kardec, of course, he will ask that question. Do spirits have an end? Because things die, don't they? Everything ends. Everything dies. Look around. There is nothing that lives forever. And the spirits is very interesting. They give a very, very long answer. And somehow very enigmatic answer. But the essence of their answer is, we are saying that the spirit's individual existence never come to an end. So there's something that doesn't end. Something doesn't die. Okay. So the spirit doesn't die. What does it that dies? Why is that so important if we don't? Let's go. So then he will ask. And here is the important part. He will connect the spiritual and the material world to make sense of our existence as a spirit and our existence that is temporary of an incarnate being. What is the soul? The soul is an incarnate spirit. Does that mean that is the same thing? The soul, the spirit? Yes, it is. When the spirit is there, is a spirit. When the spirit's here incarnated, you can call soul in order to differentiate. When we're talking about soul, if you read the Spirit's book and other works of Spiritism, you will understand when we're talking about the soul, we are talking about the spirit, but while incarnated. And then we talk about spirit when it goes back to the spiritual world. So, before the union with the body, we are a spirit. And they are one and the same thing. Yes. Before uniting with the body, the soul is one of the intelligent beings there, in the spiritual world or in the visible world. Later, temporarily, assumes a physical envelope in order to purify and enlighten itself. Then if we are talking about death, it is interesting because we can say, how come that we came from somewhere else? I don't even remember that. So we are so afraid of something that we came from. That is when we start to comprehend it, changes everything. It doesn't change right now. This is so far pure and simply information. This doesn't change centuries and centuries of learning that we have, of fear that we have, of education that we have received, to understand that the death is the end. And then not only that, depending how we were raised, by whom we were raised, where we were being taken when we were growing up, who was teaching about death, and as Umberto de Campos said, especially religion took possession of the understanding and explanation of life and death. For many of us, there are few options after death. We know that Jesus rose up from the dead and took off to eternity to be besides God. What about us? Do we have the same destiny? According to them, no. we are going to a very beautiful place that some call heaven, or we go to a terrible place where there is absolutely eternal suffering, which for many is called hell, or the hell you want to call, but it is no good. It is no wonder why we don't like to talk about death. Most of us learn that death will bring pain in some way. And of course it brings some pain. When we lose someone that we love, it hurts. It doesn't bring many good feelings. Some of us, because we don't know what's going to happen with us, if we don't accept any of those two few options or three few options, we may just say, I prefer to believe that there is nothing than suffering. I prefer to believe that nothing else is going to happen with me. I don't accept that. Doesn't make sense to me. When we get disappointed, we negate. It is very easy for us to negate. So we are in between going to a place where there will be nothing but pure contemplation. And for some who are very dynamic and energetic people, that should be a very boring place. The other side, you have eternal suffering, and you don't even know exactly what you did, depending where you go and who you talk to. For some, I may go to heaven. For some, I may go to hell. Some tell me that they have no idea where I'm going to. You know what? I'm going to give up from all of that. I'm going to block myself from trying even to understand. Let's live life and wait for the time that when it comes, because it would make no sense anyway. We know that it's not exactly like that. Today, we have a very different point of view that can try for us to make some sense of it all. First of all, we came from that place that upon death we are going back to. So necessarily there is something. But there is something that is very different from what we have been told so far. If we look about the definitions that the world gives us about death, if we search for medical, scientific explanations, one side you have the religion, the other side you have the hardcore science, materialistic, that would say, by the moment that our vital functions end, we are gone. We cease to exist. And we ask them, and then, what I've learned, and what I have lived, what I have experienced, where does this go to? Goes back to dust. Goes nowhere else. And they are very important people. When we started being more enlightened by science, after a dark period of the medieval times, we start negating the religious point of view, and we start adopting a very different and in some point very materialistic point of view of life and death. Therefore, many of us will actually base ourselves in science to justify there is nothing else. We cannot prove, we cannot see, we cannot touch. Some of them, unfortunately, would say, no one came back to tell us anything like that. They haven't met us yet, right? Allan Kardec does ask the spirits then, well, what does the soul become after death? He becomes a spirit again. There we go back to that same spirit. There we go back to that same principle, that some invisible, intangible, almost incomprehensible principle returns to the world of spirits that it has left for a while. Does it say that it gains wings? No. Does it say that changes itself completely? No. What happens with us after we die? We are the same, my friends. If we all discarnate now, after a while, we shake off and we can come back to a place similar to this one, probably, to keep learning about that exactly from where we stopped. We are spirits, first of all. Life and death, according to Spiritism, then we can understand, are different periods of our same life. It is different parts of our existence as spirits that has a meaning, that has a reason to be. Right? We come here to enlighten and perfect ourselves, as the spirits said. And then we depart, whether this task has been finished or not. And probably we will come back as long as we need to enlighten and to perfect ourselves. Well, okay then. Let's make sure that this is, for us in the Spiritism, what we understand about death, that will differ from many religious point of views and from many scientific points of view, but comprises all of them in one understanding. What dies is the body. Death does exist. It is true. We are incarnated. We do have a body. It is important for us. Is our body part of us? Absolutely. Part of us will die. But the spirit will not. Our intelligent principle, created by God, that defines who we are and what perfects itself, will not die. We will not die. And in the Spiritism, because we say that our bodies will die and we will change our bodies like a vest, when we undress from that body, we would say we will discarnate. So then we understand from the Spiritist point of view, when we are talking about death now, we are talking about discarnation. And when we change that, it may be only a play with words, but they mean a lot. If we're only talking about death, necessarily we will carry the meaning that has for us from so many years. And when we start talking about the discarnation, we start to understand that death from a completely different point of view. So when we are talking about the discarnation, we are talking about our immortal spirit undressing from a body that used temporarily in order to fulfill certain tasks. Does it make sense? It is about demystifying, first of all, a little bit. It is about taking a little bit so much stigma that we built so far and putting death where it belongs. Death is an event that will happen with all of us in some point. It is necessary. We have in Brazil a say, right? Everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. Well, you know that that's not going to happen. If you want to go to heaven or where else you think that you are going, necessarily we are all going to die. Our bodies will die. We will need to change clothes. Right? Well, okay. That's better. But then what happened? What happens? We're talking about our bodies. First of all, we're talking about ourselves. Some would say that after we die, there is this whole universe, that is for some that is God. And what's going to happen after that? Are we going back to God? You know? Are we going to keep everything that we have built so far? Science says everything is gone. But what about remembering someone? We remember who is departed. If we are the ones departing, are we going to remember them? And then Allan Kardec brilliantly will ask, does the soul preserve its individuality after the death? Because so far that spirit that we are talking about has not necessarily a defined form. It is not circumscribed like our bodies that will define us, our appearance, our persona, how we look, how we show ourselves to others. But the spirits will tell us, yes, don't worry. Whatever you have built is not going to vanish. The spirit will keep its individuality. And it's interesting because they make a very interesting counter question to us, right? What would be the soul if it had no individuality? And that's why many different philosophical and religious doctrines would say that we go back to the great whole, as if we are a drop of water that goes back to an ocean, right? Some of them would say that that ocean would be God. But we know that God is perfect. If we go back to God, I don't want to contaminate God. I'm not perfect. If I go back to God, what would be God? Made out of all of us? I'm sorry to say, I'm having a hard time to see a perfect person here, starting for myself. So, if God is made of all of us, God will not be God. So we must go somewhere else. I'm so different from you. If we go back to the same whole, where we came from, why are we so different only today? What would happen with us? Why such a transformation, coming here and going back to be all the same? That doesn't make much sense. And Allan Kardec keeps going. How does the soul preserve its individuality if it has no longer a material body? He's brilliant. He made all the questions that I wanted to make one day. It was already there, more than 150 years ago. And we are still afraid of it. We are still resisting to go back to that old bookshelf that some of our relatives have, with some dusty little book with a different cover, very different from that one here. So, those old books. It's all there, my friends. He has a proper, here they say, fluid to it. It has another matter. It has another body that will keep existing. And that body will retain its appearance after our material body is gone. Oh, so we still have a body when we're gone? Yes, we will still have a body. For some of us that are more used to Spiritism, for some of us that are more used to understanding that the communication between the two worlds exists, how many times do we read in certain books that are complementary to those ones? That the spirits, after discarnating, would say, I'm not dead. Look, I still have a body. I still can talk. I'm still the same. I'm still wearing the same clothes. Yes, this is true. That's what Allan Kardec himself created this term called perispirit. Because the spirits would say that they need an intermediary in order to communicate with us, without which it is impossible to relate, to see each other, to talk to each other in any way, even in the spiritual world. So we will retain the perispirit. we will have its own shape in order for us to keep growing and to keep relating with others. Okay then, so now we know the meaning of us being spirit, perispirit, and material body. We know that our material body will die, and we will carry our spiritual body with us that will still give us the same form, and we still have the function to shape us with an identity with which we will relate with our own individuality with others. Now it's starting to make a little more sense. Slowly, but starts to make a little more sense. So, let's then understand, how can I prove then that there is an individuality of the soul? First of all, after a couple of months or a couple of years that a loved one dies, we will suddenly wake up and come to someone and say, you have no idea, I had a dream that was so vivid. I could remember everything, the touch, the voice of the person talking to me. The person was wearing that specific clothes that they used to say that they loved. And they would come and tell me a couple of things, or simply show themselves to them. But this time was different. It was not like any crazy dream that we had. There was something different. In fact, we know that while our material bodies are sleeping because they need rest, because it gets tired, because it wears out, our spirit with our perispirit is temporarily free. We know that during this time we are back temporarily to the spiritual life. We never left the spiritual life, in fact. And we can meet those who we love, who we don't like very much, but we will still relate with them. Therefore, those moments when we are temporarily detached from our material bodies shows us that we are still the same, and other spirits are still the same. For some, they will appear to us in certain special configurations, in some specific meetings, especially in the past, the apparitions of spirits in certain meetings, or spontaneously. So many people say, I saw my uncle that died a couple of years ago. He came to me the other day. I was asking other people, did you see him? No, but I saw him. Grandma came, talked to me. I was awake, I was not sleeping. Or simply, I see people that are gone almost all the time. The communications. For this, I will really invite all of you, all the works of Francisco Cândido Xavier, many works of the mediums, especially those who are devoted for good causes, that bring consoling messages to people, to prove that death is not the end. How many messages that many family members receive from mediums, and the work is not over. The work is not over. Many different centers in Brazil, very serious institutions with serious people, are still giving those messages to people, proving that death is not the end, proving that the situation in the end, in the other side, is directly related with how they lived, and to show us many times, to give us some counsel, to give us some consolation, to give us some alert. The way that we are living today is going to matter a lot when we make that passage. And those communications prove as well that there are so many different styles of communication, which prove that there are so many different spirits, as there are different people like all of us. Then, what would happen during this incarnation? I would give a little summary of what happens during the discarnation. For any technical way, for a more in-depth way, because there is absolutely no time for so much, I really would invite all of you to read specifically one book called The Workers of Life Eternal from Francisco Cândido Xavier. And there is a video on YouTube that is called The Discarnation of Demas. Beautifully shows in a little movie what happens during the discarnation. We have no time to go through all of that. We are here keeping with the basics. But if you want anything like to complement that learning, that in many ways is theoretical, it's informative, but you can go to Francisco Cândido Xavier, Workers of Life Eternal. That is a little image from the video. That is the body of Demas discarnated. That is the thread that links his spirit to his body. And here is his perispirit being restored after the discarnation. A little bit what we talked about. Basically, the spirit then will return to the spiritual world where he came from temporarily, right? And the spirit's individuality is preserved. It retains its appearance thanks to its perispirit. And most of all, discarnation is a natural event. No matter the cause, old age, violent deaths, slow, fast, it is a natural event. Our bodies will die, one reason or another. And the separation, the soul from the body, then, of course, our bodies are what we have our sensations from, right? Our bodies hurt. We have pleasure, we have pain, we have other sensations, and our bodies are the vehicle for those sensations. And one can ask, does dying hurt? And the Spirit says something that is also very comforting to us. Nope, it doesn't hurt. It hurts more before, during life, with all the vicissitudes that our bodies give to us, with all the troubles that our body give to us, all the troubles that we give to our bodies. More than the moment of death itself. In many cases, for those who had the divine opportunity to be with someone while they are discarnating, which is a difficult moment, but at the same time give us so much lessons about ourselves. Many people still, if they had pain because of certain illnesses, by the final moments, they seem different. We know by literature, by experience, by cases that are being given to us, there is almost a glimpse of happiness, serenity, that will be so different from what we experienced during some people huge, long period of time. But usually, we feel nothing when we die. We cannot forget here, it is not directly mentioned, but we will always be assisted. As we are always being assisted during life, we will be assisted during death. In many cases, we will receive spiritual sedatives in order to go through that process without feeling so much struggle. And we will always be assisted during this time. And how that happens? Allan Kardec is such a curious man, and he helped us so much. And there is something that is very technical. Again, any development on this, please go back to Chico Xavier. Once the bonds that held the soul are ruptured, it disengages itself. We know today by the literature, the Spiritist literature, that we are linked our pure spirit to our spirit through every single cell of our bodies. It takes a while during our incarnation. The spirit slowly links itself to a body that is being formed. It takes years for the pure spirit to really form itself and attach somehow to our bodies. And in the same way with our discarnation, there are links, there are bonds that hold us together, the spirit and body, that are going to slowly disengaging themselves. And of course, that Allan Kardec will mention that to the spirits. Is that fast? Is that slow? And they will say it is gradual. In the book, there is going to be a passage here in the book Genesis. Allan Kardec will mention that we are linked molecule by molecule. And the detachment is always also molecule by molecule. It will take a while. Again, we are trying in the few minutes that we have to talk about how fast or how slow it will happen for all of us. Right here, molecule by molecule. The death of the body will make the spirit go. When our bodies wear out, we cannot stay. We need to go anyway. What about after discarnation then? First of all, we already know that we're going to keep our individuality. But the next question would be, so we are going to arrive in the other side, we're going to look around and we're going to understand everything that is happening. Everything will make sense for us, right? No. No, it's not that easy. It's very comforting information, but still not that easy. Right? The spirits would say that we don't regain immediate awareness of ourselves, because that is a very important process that happens after the discarnation. It is what the spirits call a period of confusion. Imagine sometimes that we are having such a deep sleep that when we wake up, we barely know that we are in our own houses. Have you heard that impression before? Imagine that when we are really in a very different place and we don't go back to where we were before. When the change is so radical that upon awaking, we see ourselves surrounded by completely different people in a different environment, surrounded by different energies even. Right? And we retain the impressions still of the incarnate life. We've lived with a material body. We've lived in a certain way, with a different atmosphere, with the air that we breathe, with the light that comes from natural or artificial sources. There is so much that we carry that slowly we need to change. We need time to readapt to the spirit life again. And the most important part here, less attached to all this material life, less confusion. Does that mean that what we are learning right now is important? Oh yes, it is important. It helps us somewhat to understand that one day when we wake up and say, hey, why do you have this green light here on me? Oh, I'm doing some treatment on you. You know, you can think, okay, I think I remember that lecture. That's okay, I still see myself, I'm still alive, but something else is going on. It may help us a little bit. Here is the last part that I want to bring to you. Too bad that we don't have more time for that, to be in depth. But the most important part, talking about death or talking about discarnation, is how we have lived our lives. That would change everything when it comes to how we will die, how we will feel, how much confusion we will have, how we will awaken the other side, what are the feelings that we will carry. Because if we don't carry the material body, we will still carry our memories, our feelings, our longings, our regrets, our accomplishments, our learnings, the time that we used. And here is a beautiful image, which is from the parable of the Samaritan. And it represents beautifully how to be towards others. That is the greatest example of mercy. A simple man, a Samaritan that was not given importance at all, is the only one that comes and stops and helps someone that is on the road hurt. Right? The Samaritan can be a great example for us of a good moral example on how to live our lives. Paying attention to more than ourselves. Looking to the needs of others as we look to our own needs. Understanding that others are also going through struggle instead of judging whatever someone is doing to themselves or to us. Understanding that all of us are here together in this journey to learn and to enlighten ourselves. Allan Kardec will ask, the understanding of Spiritism will help us during this passage. This, of course, it will. It will give us information which is very important, even to mitigate our fears, our fear of the unknown. But the spirits are very clear. The practice of good and purity of conscience exerts most influence, however. It comes from them. Our purity of conscience and the practice of good will help much more. So then we can arrive in the other side much better. And is the soul's moral state what defines how this passage will have impact on us. And I just put a couple of passages here from the book Heaven and Hell, and it is one of the greatest concrete lessons that we have in the second part of the book Heaven and Hell from Allan Kardec, where he compiles the communications with different spirits, how they have lived and how they arrive in the spiritual world, from happy to unhappy, from indifferent to in extreme suffering, especially for those who didn't use their lives well. And again, no time to go in depth. Another suggestion. The book Heaven and Hell will show us that the heaven and the hell that we are going to find on the other side in the spiritual world, we are the ones creating them for ourselves every step of our journey. And when we talk about being moral persons, when we talk about the attachment to material possessions, another example that comes from the teachings from the gospel is when Jesus counsels this young rich man that had money, had possessions, had all the prestige, and he tells Jesus, right? I've been good. I've been done so many things. I pay attention to all the laws. I respect my mother and my father. I go to the synagogue. And what else should I do to acquire the kingdom of heaven? That's what he asks. Which means, what should I do in order to go back to the spiritual life, the so-called eternal life, which is our real life? And then Jesus said, yes, you have done all of that. That's beautiful. But one thing you lack. You go back, you take all your possessions, you get rid of all of them, give them to those who need, and then you come back and follow me. And he goes. See his face? He's not happy. How many times, when it comes to the time to change our clothes from those big bins that we have when the weather changes here, we look to that piece of cloth, right? I know I didn't wear last year. I don't know, maybe this year, if I lose a couple pounds, that's gonna fit in me. I don't want it, it has a sentimental value. Someone that I like gave me. I know I have 8 pairs of shoes, but getting rid of one. They are just very little daily life examples of sometimes we attach ourselves to things. Negative? No. But it is a reality. Now, when we see that people don't get rid of the need of prestige, of social positions, of power, when they prefer their own benefits than the benefits of others, when you put someone in danger because actually you need only to protect yourself, those are the possessions that Jesus is talking about. The extreme attachment to material possessions. That's why I asked Teresa to read that message for us. The excessive attachment to vices. Vices. When we become dependent on what is perishable, including people. A very interesting point is to love in moderation. Our relationships, they don't belong to us. The people don't belong to us. Those things don't belong to us. In some point, because of our dependence, we belong to them. That will not let us go freely to the other side of life. Necessarily, we will long for that. It's our disposition to be addicted and dependent that is blocking us from growing. It is not necessarily one or another substance. Who has an addicted personality will jump from one addiction to the other. Can be people, can be sex, can be relationships that are poisonous. It can be the need for approval. It can be the need for money. It can be the need for power. That will not let us go to the spiritual world. We will be still attached to the material life that we necessarily need to say goodbye to. Those are the vices that today, during our lives, we can be aware of and educate ourselves. Therefore, to die well or to acquire the kingdom of heaven, we gotta live well. Can we do anything about our death? Yes. We may not know exactly when we are going, but we can do something today. Because if we go tomorrow and if we gave one step, we are one step closer. It is only one step, but it is one. It's better than no step. So basically that was the message, the training for that I asked Teresa to say. And basically we're not going to have time. I just put here all of the things that potentially we could do in order to be aware, right? To do certain things in moderation, to change our habits, to live according to our faith. And there it goes. I'm not going to leave it that much. We came to our time. But we will end with one last note. And always I like to bring the message from the one who is responsible for us to open our eyes to the life of the Spirit, who was the one that went to the spiritual life, came back to us to tell us, we don't die, we are all alive. And if you live accordingly to the principles that I have taught you, you will live well and you will die well. In fact, he told us, who believes me, even in death, will not die. And he believes in me, will never die. Because the death doesn't exist. The death of the body, the death of the old habits, the death of the old human will happen. And for this death, we gotta rejoice. Because every time that we change our ways, something will die. But for our own good, because we are going to open the space for something else to live. The new human that we can be every single day. And Jesus makes us that question that we can leave to you. Do you believe this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiago, for a great
12 o'clock.
for a great lecture. I know we're kind of a short for time, but I'm just opening quickly if anybody has a question or a quick comment to make. The subject was a little bit too deep. Nobody wants to talk about death usually, right? Okay, so let's get all together and prepared for our passes. I think pretty much in position. Good.
I will leave the last
And
one.
I want to say goodbye to the people on the internet. Thank you for being with us and hope to see you next Sunday again. Thank you.